I don't think little big girls should go walking in these spooky old woods alone. What big eyes you have, the kind of eyes that drive wolves mad. Just to see that you don't get chased, I think I ought to walk with you for a ways. What full lips you have, they're sure to lure someone bad. So until you get to Grandma's place, I think you ought to walk with me and be safe. I'm gonna keep my sheep suit on till I'm sure that you've been shown that I can be trusted walking with you alone. Little Red Riding Hood, I'd like to hold you if I could, but you might think I'm a big bad wolf, so I won't. What a big heart I have, the better to love you with. Little Red Riding Hood, even bad wolves can be good. I'll try to keep satisfied just to walk close by your side. Maybe you'll see things my way before we get to Grandma's place. Little Red Riding Hood, you sure are looking good. You're everything a big bad wolf could want. Little Red Riding Hood, I don't think little big girls should go walking in these spooky old woods alone. What big eyes you have, the kind of eyes that drive wolves mad. Just to see that you don't get chased, I think I ought to walk with you for a ways. What full lips you have, they're sure to lure someone bad. So until you get to Grandma's place, I think you ought to walk with me and be safe.
Hey guys, it's Malia and welcome to Happily Never After. Today we're going to be discussing Perrault's tragedy, Little Red Riding Hood, the story of a little girl who got herself and her grandmother killed by talking to animals. Now, if the big bad wolf was a snake, at least we'd be able to call her a Parseltongue, but talking to wolves? That's just plain weird. Let's take a closer look at the plot.
One day, in a little country village, a little girl who everyone thought was beautiful was casually hanging around her house, basically doing nothing, when her mom called her over to take some cakes to her grandma. She had heard that she was sick, and she felt like doing something nice.
Now, Perrault tells us that Little Red's mother loves her very much, yet we see here that she's sending her kid through a forest to another town by herself. Not such a great idea.
So, as we get further into the story, Little Red is walking through the woods with a basket of goodies, minding her own business, when a wolf sees her and tries to get all up in her grill without her noticing. He would have made a meal out of her right then and there, but there were a couple of lumberjacks out chopping wood, and he didn't want to be next. So he slid into her DMs and asked her what she was up to. Little Red didn't have any street smarts, and her careless mother obviously never taught her not to talk to strangers, so she tells the wolf she's taking cakes to her grandma, discloses the poor woman's address, and thinks she's gonna be on her merry way. Well, that was not the case. The wolf challenges her to a race to her grandma's house and takes off running. Now, Little Red, being about as clueless as a kid can be, takes the long way and wastes time chasing butterflies and picking flowers. So while she's lollygagging in the woods, the wolf is sprinting to her granny's like he's Jesse Owens. When he reaches the door, he gets up and knocks, because that's normal. And since wolf tongue is apparently hereditary too, when the wolf tells the grandma that he's Little Red,
she tells him how to open the door.
After she writes her own death sentence, the wolf swings open the door, eats her in one swallow like all other carnivores, and jumps into the woman's bed, carefully avoiding all of the disgusting used tissues. He waits for Little Red to finally show up, since she's taking her sweet time like girls often do, and when she gets to the door, she knocks. Now, when the wolf opens its mouth to ask who's knocking, she almost had the sense to run away. But no, she doesn't. She answers the wolf, opens the door, and puts the cake down. When her grandma tells her to get in bed, she takes off her clothes and jumps right in. Why? Just why? Then we get to the traditional back and forth, "Grandmother, what big arms you have!" "All the better to hug you with, my dear." "Grandmother, what big legs you have!" "All the better to run with, my child." Blah, 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 until we finally get to, "Grandmother, what big teeth you have!" "All the better to eat you up with."
And the rest is history. Like all other imbecilic horror story protagonists, Little Red's ignorance led her straight into the wolf's mouth. So, what's with all that? Did we really need another frustrating storyline with a dim-witted protagonist? Take it away, future me.
Moral of the story? Children, especially attractive, well-bred young ladies, should never talk to strangers, for if they should do so, they may well provide dinner for a wolf. I say wolf, but there are various kinds of wolves. There are also those who are charming, quiet, polite, unassuming, complacent, and sweet, who pursue young women at home and in the streets, and unfortunately, it is these gentle wolves who are the most dangerous ones of all. Perot, 53. The truth is, past me, that the story is a bit more dense than you made it out to be. Beneath the surface, there's a lot going on. When Charles Perrault wrote Little Red Riding Hood in the late 17th century, there was a common French slang phrase used to describe the loss of a girl's virginity, "Elle avait vu le loup," which translates to "she had seen the wolf." Perhaps the most obvious sexual symbolism in Charles Perrault's Little Red Riding Hood is that of the little girl getting undressed and climbing into bed with the wolf. In fact, an early version of Perrault's tale was accompanied by a sexually suggestive engraving in which the wolf is under the sheets with the little girl lying on top of her while she touches his snout. To explain the reason behind Perrault's moral, it should be explained that at the end of the 17th century, conservatives in France believed that modern women were destroying family life and social values. Many of these conservatives were members of the French Academy, an old boys' club that met in the Louvre, of which Perrault had become president in 1672. At that time, women had been granted access to education, and these conservatives feared that women would gain too much knowledge and independence, as their intention was for girls to be schooled, but not to assume any political responsibility. Perrault, who had become a prolific defender of court society, used his playful and ironic fairy tales to illustrate courtly morals. Among those courtly morals was the mariage de raison, which could most fittingly be translated as marriage for expediency, and was an affair orchestrated by parents for social and economic advancement. In other words, it was an arranged marriage between young adults of the marrying age for which virginity was an absolute requirement. In this way, Perrault's fairy tale Little Red Riding Hood served as a warning of female promiscuity, as premarital sex deemed girls unqualified for the mariage de raison. The fact that the protagonist is cloaked in red, which could symbolize harlots, scandal, and blood, already foreshadows her fate. The story ultimately warns girls who Perrault, at least in the original French version, describes as well-bred and refined, of handsome and charming wolves, who we would refer to as womanizers today, who want to take their virginity and in the process of doing so, also their value in the mariage de raison. As for the literary elements, Perrault's use of diction is quite traditional, seen in his use of the phrase once upon a time at the start of the tale, as well as the vocabulary he uses throughout. In the piece, the tone remains rather cautionary, serving its purpose to sway the audience from trusting wolves, and the structure differs greatly from its successor, the Grimm version. Instead of formulating an addition of falling action and a resolution, aka Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother being saved by a lumberjack, Perrault chose to end his story at the climax, Little Red Riding Hood's death, or delving a little deeper into its meaning, her rape. Channeling into the modern era, a similar story is told in Leonardo DiCaprio's Red Riding Hood, set in a medieval village haunted by a werewolf. However, DiCaprio's version transformed the original story into the dark tale of forbidden love, death, and secrecy. This story's Red, Valerie, portrayed by Amanda Seyfried, feels torn between two young men. She loves a woodcutter named Peter, but her parents arrange a marriage between her and wealthy Henry, a blacksmith, so she'll never have to live in poverty. As a result, Valerie and Peter plan on running away together, but her older sister is killed by the werewolf before they can put their plan into action. Seeking revenge, the town's men set out to hunt down and kill the beast, but they lose another, Henry's dad and Valerie's mother's lover, in the process. Desperate for a solution, the villagers call on the help of Father Solomon, a famous monster hunter who warns that the beast takes human form by day and wolf form by night, so no one can be trusted. The second attack is during a festival where the wolf corners Valerie and tells her to run away with it, or it will continue to terrorize the village. Like the original tale, Valerie is able to understand the wolf, and because of her ability, she's dubbed a witch. Father Solomon begins his search for the wolf, torturing an autistic boy for answers and using Valerie as bait to lure it in. The ending carries Valerie down the same path to her granny's house, where she finds her acting rather strangely. As she pulls back the bed curtain, Valerie comes to find that the wolf, spoiler alert, is her father. He wanted to leave the village and take his children with him into the city. When he tried to speak to his oldest daughter as a wolf, she didn't understand him. He realized that his wife had had an affair, and in a fit of rage, he killed her. Valerie and Peter manage to kill him, but not before he bites Peter, turning Peter into a werewolf. Peter tells Valerie not to tell anyone that her father was a wolf because she'd be killed for association. Then he leaves her behind in the village to protect her from himself, and they live happily never after. Did you get all that? Probably not. Let's take a closer look. Leonardo DiCaprio's film Red Riding Hood, though only loosely based on the original tale, explores similar concepts from a different perspective. In regards to sexuality, DiCaprio touches on the idea of arranged marriage, an ancient notion that is still prevalent in the modern world today. Valerie explains her love for Peter to her parents, but because of Henry's wealth, they refuse to call off the wedding. Throughout the movie, the audience sees Valerie explore her sexuality with Peter, but because she's engaged to Henry, when other villagers find out, she's deemed a whore. Another key point in regards to marriage in the film is the cut scenes when Valerie is dreaming of running away with the wolf. She's pictured on a snowy mountain with a long red hood trailing behind her, similar to a bridal train. Perrault's main purpose for writing Little Red Riding Hood was to deter young women from premarital sex, and in order for Valerie to marry Henry, she must remain untouched. This brings about a sort of irony in that Valerie's red cloak represents her sexuality she's discovered with Peter while engaged to Henry. The tone throughout the movie is dark and suspenseful, from Valerie's childhood hunting rabbits with Peter to the last scene when he leaves for the mountains. The diction is also surprisingly modern for a film set in the medieval times, though the movie did come out in 2011. There's really no use of any kind of Dark Age accent, and the vocabulary is synonymous with that of today. The structure is also traditional, from the rising action being the search for the wolf, the climax being the defeat of the wolf or Valerie's father, and the falling action being Peter's departure from Daggerhorn. All in all, DiCaprio's message can be interpreted as this: you aren't wealthy until you have something money can't buy. In Wolf, an adolescent heroine runs away to her grandmother's house after being raped by her mother's boyfriend, an alcoholic and abuser. After her mother learns about the crime, she threatens to run away with the girl, but the boyfriend/Wolf murders her before she can. When the girl arrives at her grandma's house, she begins to worry when she doesn't answer the door and isn't out back smoking as usual. The girl sees the boyfriend's car in the driveway and runs inside. The grandmother had been holding him at gunpoint, and she was beginning to lower the gun when the girl started yelling about how he had raped her for all those years and had probably already killed her mother. She then takes the gun from her grandma, and in a fit of rage, shoots the wolf in retaliation for her rape and the murder of her mother. In choosing to make her nameless protagonist the narrator, Bloch causes the narrative to be written entirely in first person, whereas Perrault chose to write in third person objective. The choice to write in first person causes the reader to empathize with the protagonist and further gives the protagonist strength in a modern world so fixed on victim shaming, a concept where the victim is blamed for the actions of the aggressor. She was asking for it, etc. As a postmodern author, Bloch's dialect is aligned with the language and slang of today, making her story rather straightforward. Her phrases are very honest and frank, adding to the gritty tone of her work. The use of the words putrid, skanky, and sick in describing the antagonist paints him in a negative light and combats the idea that the girl was to blame. Ultimately, Bloch's appreciation for fairy tales is evident in her retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, and her version was written for young adults of the time, as Perrault's was. However, it proves more harsh and gritty, though both hers and Perrault's explore explicit ideas. The plot that Bloch provides is a long way from far-fetched, and by absorbing the reader into the story, she is able to evoke emotion and prove her point.
She was following her path. It happened to be less traveled when a wolf spied her basket, and with greed became unraveled. He needed an excuse, you see, to take all he could. His eyes glazed over her carefree smile and landed on that little red hood. Poor girl, he whispered, hiding her beauty beneath that cover. This reeks of coercion. Her freedom must be recovered. And in a tale as old as time, under the guise of modernization, he locked his eyes on that yard of fabric to weave a narrative of justification.
Dun, dun, dun.